All right, well, welcome back from break. Hopefully everyone's ready to go and excited about this last session. I know I am. I'd like to welcome you all again to the 2021 Grants Conference, the Georgia Research Administrators Network Conference. We also have a group on LinkedIn, and there has been a link previously in the chat, and I'm not sure if Gail is still on. But if she is, if she can put another link to join the group if you guys are interested. In the chat, you can go directly to the group and add yourself. Just a reminder that we will send out evaluations for the conference. You'll probably be receiving those tomorrow. And all of the recordings and presentations will also be sent out to registrants. And so everyone who has registered, I see a couple of names on here that may or may not have registered, but that's okay, that's fine. So we will send those out. I'll also put a PDF of this presentation in the chat just a second here as soon as I finish yapping, but definitely wanted to introduce Rashonda Harris. I've had the pleasure of attending several of Rashonda's sessions. She's well known and well respected in the field. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rashonda to talk about exploring implicit biases. So Rashonda, have at it. And we'll try to, if you're, depending on how long the presentation does, we'll try to field some questions. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Erica, for having me. And as Erica mentioned, I'm Rashonda Harris. I am an adjunct faculty member at Johns Hopkins University, and I'm also a member of G.R.A.N.T, and I am on the select committee for the, I'm sorry, not the select committee, the Presidential Task Force on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And so if there are some answers here that you do not find today or you need, we have some sessions that are coming up, and I welcome you to join us. They're completely free. And so today I'm going to jump right into the session that I have here, and we're going to talk about exploring implicit biases. So when it comes to implicit bias, the first thing that we must talk about is explicit bias, because they're often confused. Explicit bias is basically an attitude that we have about a person or a group that is a conscience level, meaning we are very aware of this bias. And most of the time, the bias is expressed out of a perceived threat. For example, if you are walking down the street and you see someone that is, wearing a long trench coat and maybe a hoodie or a hat, and just you're not able to see their face and lighting's not good, you might see them as a threat. And that may be a form of an explicit bias, because that person could just be completely normal, not doing anything, minding their business, but you see them as kind of a threat. And because of how they're dressed, you associate that with something dangerous, and that's a form of an implicit bias. When it comes to implicit bias is often defined as being prejudiced or having unsupported judgment in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared to another in a way that is usually considered unfair. And what that means is that we are making an assumption that may not be altogether accurate, and that accuracy depends on checking our blind spot, to see if we are accurate in what we're depicting. Just as we check our blind spot when we're driving to see other things that are outside of our peripheral vision, this is the same thing you will think of when you think of your implicit bias. And also checking your peripheral blind spot helps you to prevent collisions. And it's also similar to understanding and addressing implicit biases. It allows us to see the biases that we might possess and that are not explicit and often not realized, to help promote a more diverse and equitable environment that we're in. And this session will offer insights so that you can be more mindful of how our biases come out and deliberate in how we move forward with those biases. So again, implicit biases are something that we don't even think about them. It's such an unconscious thing that it just happens. It's an instant stereotype, an instant attitude toward a particular group. For example, unfortunately, in the news right now, we're seeing a lot of what was maybe implicit bias become an explicit bias of what's happening to the Asian community, and they're being targeted for statements that were not altogether true. Now, what you just heard me say is that an implicit bias became an explicit bias, because what happened is, before, people may have been thinking about it, but then they started acting on it. And when you start to act on something and you start to actually take and adopt this way of thinking, what occurs is now it's implicit because I am intentional in what I'm thinking. I understand that I'm thinking this way, and I am aware of it. And so those are just ways that implicit biases can become explicit. And that also expresses the importance of why, if not addressed, we can really make some implicit biases more offensive, and they could be more detrimental to how we interact and engage with others around us. And as we are all aware, there's so much turmoil in the air right now. The pandemic has made everybody a little bit testy, and it has made us kind of on edge. And so people are more sensitive and quicker to erupt. And with that, it makes us even more, it makes it even more important as to why we should really take our time to be intentional about our implicit biases to address them. There are 3 levels of biases. The first one is a micro level, and it's in social relation, personal lives, beliefs, and behaviors. So, for example, you might have something that is within your subgroup or in your personal group that is a bias. For example, if you see, well, actually, I'm going to go into it, but I don't want to use that example. But you see someone that is of a different background than you, and you are you go to different schools. You might judge that person as not having the same education as you. That's a micro bias. That's where it's in your group, and because of your association with your individual understanding of that specific school, you feel yours is better than the other. That's a smaller bias. Then you might have it on a larger level, which is a meso bias, which is organizational, institutional, and cultural practices. This is something that is really big, and you'll see this with large institutions that are Ivy League or very well known, where they feel, well, I am an Ivy League institution, so I don't have to worry about these things because I'm here. Those are biases where you feel because your institution is very much known, it's better than other institutions, which is not altogether true, but just an assumption. And then you have macro, which are social, cultural, and political and economic divisions. And this really played out within the recent elections, where we saw a lot of those biases. How many people right now, if I asked, would say that Trump supporters have a lower level of an IQ? Not altogether true, but that's a bias that we might think. Or vice versa to, Democratic parties where, they don't really react. Those are things that we think with a social, economic, or political group. These are the 3 levels of biases that are often in play, whether we realize it or not. So let's look through our lens of bias. How does implicit bias play out? Implicit bias matters because everyone possesses these unconscious associations, and the implicit biases affect our decisions, behaviors, and interactions with others. Although implicit bias can be positive or negative, or both have a harmful effect when they are influenced on our decision making. And so we're going to look through the lens and see what is the first or the most common way implicit biases are played out. They're played out in microaggressions. Many times we don't even realize that we are utilizing microaggressions because they are something that is just so common to us that we don't even think about it. And so microaggressions are it's an outgrowth of implicit bias. And a professor at Columbia University defines the term prejudice that leak out in many interpersonal situations, decisions, and decision points. That's how microaggressions have been, the term has been defined. However, we use this so often that it is something that I would place a bet to say that everybody here has used a form of a microaggression, whether they realize it or not. And because that we use these so often, we don't realize that most of the time these microaggressions are racial. Racial microaggressions are subtle, verbal, and nonverbal racial insults. And they are often degrading messages. And often automatically we unconsciously release them without even thinking about it. They're directed to an individual due to their racial or marginalized identity. It's usually commented by a well-intentioned person who's unaware of the hidden messages committed in what they're saying. The importance of this is that the statements are often unintentional, but they are often very damning to the impact of the person. And what happens is people internalize these and they begin to not be as engaged in conversations with people where microaggressions are often used. In children and adults, these really can affect the mental and physical and health. It really affects our self-esteem and our well-being, our ability to be social. If you are in a session where you are the minority and then a microaggression is used, you won't find it to be very welcoming, where you feel that you want to engage and continue to talk to these people around you because you're feeling that you're being ostracized from the conversation. Here are examples of microaggressions. Muslims are not all terrorists. Unfortunately, this is something that people might say in a conversation and not realize just how harmful it is. And I am not a color. I will not cut your grass. I am not white trash. Not all Asians are studious and have squinty eyes and speak the same language. We are not all Mexican. My hair is real. I will marry who I want. These are the unfortunate microaggressions that people receive every day and are not going to speak up. They're not going to say, hey, this is unfair. What they're going to do most times is they're going to go inward and choose not to engage in the conversation. And so what I want all of us to think about as we are sitting here today, we've taken a step to be engaged and to really check our implicit biases. And if you've ever found that you have said any of these statements, I want you to be more intentional and think about it before you speak. I saw this as an advertisement on a social website. It wasn't Facebook. It wasn't Instagram. It wasn't Snapchat. It wasn't TikTok. It was LinkedIn. And somebody put this as a celebratory statement that this is how I want to spend 2021. Speak English, kiss French, dress Italian, spin Arab, party Caribbean. Now, without thought, it might seem this is completely harmless. But when you think about it, you can really say, wow, how many people don't speak English? There are so many people that don't speak English in America. There are a lot of small-minded people who think that the majority should speak English, but in school, guess what? You have the option to learn multiple languages. Why? Because other languages besides English are spoken throughout the world. That is the importance of it. Now, I will say this, even with English, guess what? There are many dialects of English. Depending on where you are in the United States, you're going to get a whole different group of the same words being used with different meanings. For example, I'm originally from Pennsylvania. When I came down to the South, there were some words that were spoken and I found myself questioning the meaning of those words. Now, what did I do? I was an observer. I was learning these new words and the different meanings that they all had. If you go a little bit over to New Orleans, well, guess what? Baby, you got a whole different dialectal group of people who are speaking English, but in a different way. And so understand that simple things such as this can have such an impact. Why is kissing French better than kissing Indian or kissing Japanese? What makes French kissing so much better? You know why? It's romanticized. And because it's romanticized, it's intended to have this allure that makes it so much special, more special than what it is. When I think of French, I think of French fries. That's my favorite French thing. Now, is that really French? Not exactly, right? But that's the thing. We think about things and we associate them without understanding their impact. When we think about dressing Italian, well, I will say Italians are some great crafters and they have a lot of nice clothing. But how about, French designers or American designers? I will say fashion is in the eye of the beholder. You may not agree on what somebody else agrees is fashionable, and that's to each his own. But when you call it out in such a way that could be offensive, it makes it more damning to the people who are reading this. And as we look at the next one, spin Arab. Why? What does that mean? I'm guessing they feel Arabs have a lot of money. But even the term just saying Arab, is that not offensive in itself? These are the things that people use interchangeably without thought because it's implicit. They're not aware. It's actually unconscious, but it's a unfortunate stereotype that's being used and not often a fair one. Now, Party Caribbean. I mean, I would imagine that there are some great parties happening in the Caribbean, but I'm sure there's some parties that are great happening anywhere you go, because I personally think parties are not where you are, it's the people who are there. But in any event, you see just a simple posting just like this on how important understanding our biases and what they mean to other people. Now, when I looked at this post, guess what? I saw a lot of people who were offended. There were comments asking, why do we need to speak English? Why do you need to dress Italian? Someone just put into the chat about an Indian designer and that they wish that they could afford those clothes. I will admit, Indian designers are really nice. There are a number of nice Indian items I've seen myself, which proves the point that not only Italian designers are great, right? So again, as we look at things, we always are thinking, how can I change this? What can I do? The way you do it is to be intentional. The only way to make that progress is to have an intentional effort behind your intent. How many times have you gone to the doctor and have heard someone oversay any of these items, any of these sayings? Do you speak English? Are there any doctors from America here? Nurse, can you find me a doctor? Well, guess what? I've also seen, how old are you? How many times have you heard that? People question how old the doctor is. What I'm going to say is that when I go to the doctor, I don't care what your ethnicity is, as long as you are trained to treat me appropriately and satisfactorily, I'm okay. I want the best care. I want the doctor who got the best grades. I don't care how old they were. I don't care what background they come from, as long as they're good. But often than not, people say these things, and this is why they're getting care. At a doctor's office or at a hospital, many times if you're at a hospital, you're there for a reason that is pretty dire or important. And so the last thing you should be worried about is how old your doctor is, or if they speak English, or are they from America? Because a lot of times we have people here who are asked, are you from America? Who's to say that this doctor was not born and raised in America? We don't know that. There are assumptions that are being made. And so, these are things that we don't think about, but we should think about them. And why should we think about them? Because they're offensive. And as a doctor, as a patient, the last thing I want to do is offend my doctor. I want my doctor to be welcomed and know that I'm appreciative of the services that they're going to do and that they're going to take care of me. And so as we continue on, what can we do to change this? We can stop looking and start seeing. Seeing people for who they are, not who we assume they are. Before you open your mouth to say something offensive, maybe ask a question. Don't assume. There are a lot of times I have people who have said things to me that are offensive, and sometimes I don't say anything, and then other times I might actually say something to them. Because why? Because it depends on the level of the offense that has been committed. Now, there are a lot more people who are not, extroverts and are, willing to jump out there. And because of that, we need to have that personal consideration to make sure that the engagements that we have with each other are respectful and are considerate in the manner that we would want others to engage with us. And so here, it happens with not only doctors, it happens with students. How many of you can say that you've heard any of these or had these said to you? You're really pretty for a dark-skinned girl. Last I checked, why is it that me being dark-skinned has to be associated with pretty? As a Black woman, I'm going to tell you, we come in all shades of beauty, from light bright all the way down to very midnight. And let you know this, when you say that to any person of color, they are offended. And that's something that we need to think about. Courtney, I never see you as a Black girl. That right there is so offensive. Let me tell you this. What do you see me as? I'm a Black person. I'm always going to be Black. I can't interchange my skin. So what do you see me as if you don't see me as a Black girl? That's the first thing you should see me as. And then, so what? So what do you guys speak in Japan again? What do you speak in Japan again? Asian. That is so offensive. You see a lot of people here who say things, about languages that they assume. I can tell you this, I have met plenty of non-American people who speak English better than Americans. You know why? Because they're taking the time to be respectful of a language and to learn it well. And so this is some of the things that we have to think about. We have to be deliberate, we have to be conscious, and we have to be mindful, because you know what? I don't want to be insulted. I don't ever want to be, where I'm in a conversation where I'm just meeting a person and one of these sayings have just been, put into the air. Because guess what? Now the air is thick. I'm not feeling really like I want to engage with these people because you just said something to offend me, And although it's not listed here, you get a lot of different sayings where men say things to women that are very, very offensive. Oh, are you going to cry now? There are men who cry too. Why is it that a woman crying is so different? You have people who are leaders who say things that they don't realize that they're saying that are also offensive. And so, again, the only thing we can do is to be thoughtful. So before you let something leave your lips, think about what we're saying. That's actually a good one. Someone has noted in the box that said, you look mixed. That is offensive. Why does it matter what I'm mixed with? How about I'm mixed with human? That's what I'm mixed with. I saw something that said that people were talking about, you have people who are transgender, and that is something that is really, really taken off. You hear a lot about people using pronouns, and when somebody gives you their pronouns, that is your first clue to be respectful, because I've let you know what my pronouns are going to be. But yet people say, well, why do you need a pronoun? Why can't you just be what you are? I'm telling you who I am. Respect what I've taken the time to do is inform you of who I am. Things like that. People don't understand the importance that I would like to be given the same respect that you would like me to give to you. And the last thing I want to say about this that's often important about any of these microaggressions is that when they happen in the workplace, many times the people who commit the microaggression complain, well, you know what? Ebony just got upset with me because I said she was really pretty for a dark girl. Dang, I'm just giving you a compliment. She needs to loosen up. I'm really offended by her behavior. Well, let's take a step back. Ebony is the one that should be offended. But what happens is Ebony will be talked to, and she will get the talk to say that you need to be more approachable. People are trying to get to know you, and you're not being as welcoming. Key point as leaders, be mindful of how we address microaggressions in the workplace, because they happen far more often than you realize. Someone also noted in here about why don't you straighten your hair? It will look more professional. I can tell you that is one of, and I started to put that in the slide, but I didn't because it's so common. But it is something that should not have to be said. But what does it mean to have professional hair? You know what professional hair is? However way you bring it to work, as long as it's not interfering with anybody else, I see it as professional. The same thing with head wraps. When you have head wraps on, it's a part of a religion. Why is it that I have to address it and explain it to everybody else? Why can't you look and respect me for who I am? I'm here to work, and that's it. As long as I'm here to work, and I'm doing my job and it's not interfering in anything else, that's what it should be. But again, I can't, stress this enough. As leaders, when you hear a microaggression, stop it in its tracks. Do not let that be something that is okay to go around and to be, to continue in that environment, because what will happen is soon you will see an environment where nobody is talking because nobody wants to have that awkward conversation. So these are some of the stereotypes that are being actually discussed in the chat about microaggression examples, where a woman is expected to adopt a female stereotype, like a secretary, whereas men adopt technical roles or leaders. But as many of you probably know that, now with the pandemic, you might see men and women in these roles interchangeably, but women primarily support men's work in STEM and should take on roles that are considered to align with their assumed skills. That's the gender stereotype. And so what you'll see here, and especially since we are all in research administration, is that there is a need for women in STEM. There's a need for minorities in STEM, because a lot of what has occurred and what we see is that some of the advances that we've made or are not making are due to not having an inclusive environment to engage ideas such as women, such as minorities that bring different aspects. One of the things I love about diversity, equity, and inclusion is just the amount of ideas you get. There's so many ideas that come from different perspectives. And when you have multiple perspectives, that diversity right there is priceless. Here's another example. A woman's idea is ignored yet accepted when repeated later by a man. How many women have been mansplained? You say one thing, and as soon as you say it, a man re-says the exact same thing. Guess what? Oh, now they understood what was said because the man has said it. Now, I can tell you nothing more than that pisses me off when I know I said something the exact same way that it was just repeated, but now it's acknowledged. In that instance is often where the man will get credit for the idea because the woman was never heard. And that is really unfortunate and is very much unfair. Then here is another one. Somebody assumes that a woman has been admitted to their STEM majority because of their gender. Not likely. When minorities and women are put into male dominant or one's particular ethnicity is dominating that specific field, they actually have to work that much harder to be recognized, that much harder to be in that field, which means they are likely the top of the top to be recognized and to get into that role. And that's something that, it's often, perceived that women are not as skilled and that, they're only getting here because, we had to check a spot. That's not the case. And it should not be something that is tolerated. So cognitive bias, what is that? So let's start off with a basic about cognitive bias in the definition. It's a systematic error in a cognitive process like thinking, perceiving, and memory. And what happens is it changes the rationality of how we see things and can affect our judgment. And if we think of the human brain as a computer, your cognitive bias basically is an error in the coding, making us perceive the input differently or to come up with an output that is illogical, but other types of biases as well are not necessarily cognitive, but they play into this role. And so, for example, there's a theory of social proofing, and so which is a popular social psychologist says that when you are in a group of people, a group of a setting, we can tend to start to think what the group thinks, because why? Our cognitive bias is telling us that we're in this setting and everybody else thinks it, so it must be okay because everybody else is thinking it. And so I want us to think about, you know, how our cognitive biases play into our implicit biases. And here are a few current or I should say new biases. So you'll see across at the top, there's one for memory, social, learning, belief, money, and politics. Each of the items that are impacted here are noted at the top of each card. So for example, this card right here, it has blue, which is belief, it has memory, and then it has learning. And this is the Google effect. This is digital amnesia, where we forget information because it's easily looked up. So when I was coming up and I was in school, we used to look in encyclopedias. We had to go by letter and look up the specific items. Now, nope, I don't need to do that. I can go right to Google. Well, let me see. I don't believe what you're saying. Let me go and check it and see if Google agrees with what you're saying. Because the Google effect helps me to say that, you know, yes, I believe you, or no, I don't believe you. But it's also a bias, because just because it's in Google does not mean it's accurate. And so that's the Google effect. Then you have the curse of knowledge. Once we know something, we assume everybody else knows it too. And so that's you know, well, you didn't know that? Like, for example, you know, everybody knows the 90-day cost transfer rule, right? We're in research administration. I'm sure you heard of that. Well, depending on your level of engagement in research administration, you may have never heard of the 90-day rule, or your area of specialty, you may not have heard of that rule. Then you have the false consensus. We believe it more because we believe more people agree with us than actually is the case. And sometimes this occurs with leadership, because I'm the leader. People don't want to stand up and say, hey, I really don't agree with you. So I'm going to assume that everybody thinks that because nobody said anything, so everybody must agree with me. That's a bias. And it's not always accurate, because sometimes you have to make a reflection of yourself as a leader to say, have I created an environment where people actually feel comfortable sharing their opinion and engaging with me? If not, then you may be under the false consensus bias. In-group favoritism. We favor people who are in our group as opposed to those who are out our group. Have you ever heard of cliques? That's what this would be. People have cliques, and it is such a natural thing to have cliques. But the first thing that happens in cliques is, well, my clique is here, and it's okay when I'm in my clique. But the minute my clique, the people in my clique are not here and I'm left on my own, I feel ostracized. Why are these people being so mean to me? Not once do we take a step back to say, is that how my clique is perceived? Because that often happens when people have group favoritism. And so the last one I want to talk about is the backfire effect, which is disproven evidence sometimes as the unwarranted effect of confirming our beliefs. You know, I'm going to use the elephant in the room or not in the room about this one, where people have this undying belief that a certain president still won the election, although everything disproves it. Well, what happens is I'm going to look for evidence that actually fits my narrative. I'm not going to go and see something that doesn't fit my narrative. I'm going to go into something that I know is going to agree with me. And so I'm going to use this as as something to disprove the evidence of what I don't want to believe. Yes, confirmation bias. That is definitely a form of confirmation bias. But these are some of the newer terms of biases, and I encourage you to look them up. There's actually a group of 50 that fit into this new form. And if you like, I'm happy to share it with you. I think I have it in. I can put it in a link before I'm done. So The next one I want to talk about is anchoring bias. And so anchoring bias is the first piece of information you see or often hear ends up being the anchor for what others follow. And so sometimes we get some information and we make a decision based off of that information. And so anything that comes behind it, we still go back to the first part of that information. And so this also happens when information comes from a specific source. For example, if a source is a well-respected source and a higher position, we tend to believe that this information is valid because of where it came from. That is called anchoring bias. Next is recency bias. And recency bias is a tendency to overvalue the latest information available. And that just means because it's recent, it's in your vicinity, and so you're going to say, okay, this has to be it because this is fresh, this is what just came out. But for example, if you heard that a CEO is resigning from a company and you own shares of that company, your impulse might be to say, you know what, let me get rid of these shares because the stock is going to go down. But not necessarily. There could be a number of reasons why that person is resigning. So you should be careful with it. Instead of focusing on the short-term information, you want to focus on the long-term information and trends and experience to come with a more measured course of action rather than a knee-jerk reaction. Okay. Next, lost average bias. This is where it comes in the form of being competitive. I don't like losing. I want to win. So I always want to be on the winning side of things. And in order to be on the winning side of things, I'm going to do whatever it takes to be on that winning side of things. So rather than take the smarter investment, or the smarter choice, or the choice that may be a little bit longer, I'm choosing based off of what I think is going to give me a win versus a lesson. This is a common one, the bandwagon bias. Everybody tends to kind of go what the bandwagon get on the bandwagon. For example, you might hear a sports team that is often doing that's been doing horrible. All of a sudden they're doing great. Now everybody supports them. They're jumping on the bandwagon to say this must be a great. This is a great team. I've always been a supportive or a fan of this team because they're doing well. That's bandwagon bias. And the thing about bandwagon bias is that you tend to believe them because other people are believing in them, but that doesn't always mean that's the case. Sometimes people believe in certain things for their own motives and personal reasons, not necessarily because it's the right thing to do. And somebody mentioned about confirmation bias, sticking with the information that validates our own point of view, and disregarding anything that conflicts with our reasoning. That is the key example of where you see so many people who, like to say, what happened in an election was one thing, and then you have somebody else to say, well, no, I believe it this way. Both cannot be convinced that the other is accurate because they are so, they're so devoted to their beliefs. And the confirmation of that is that other people feel the same way. And so confirmation bias doesn't always mean that it's accurate. It means that you look for things to, confirm your belief rather than to say, let me be objective. Let me see, is there something else that says that conflicts with it. For example, we read things in the news all the time. Most people might go and say, let me check this out before I say, give a call to somebody to say, hey, did you hear what happened in the news? Where other people, they'll just repost it to say, hey, yep, this happened. I saw it on the news, or I saw it in this article. How many celebrities have been killed with, rumors on the internet, and they're still alive and kicking? That's an example. So how do you overcome your bias? You overcome your bias by what you've done today. You've taken the first step. You're educating yourself. And when you educate yourself, the first thing that you can do is now be more conscious. You can be deliberate. You can be intentional in your efforts to make sure that you are thinking and being more thoughtful of your ideas and statements that you make before you do it. Individual strategies to address your unconscious bias includes promoting self-awareness, recognizing our own biases. If you cannot recognize it, then of course you cannot be intentional in your efforts to try to be mindful and respectful of other people because you're not aware of it. Being aware of your own biases is key, but also being transparent with yourself. A lot of people, they think I'm self-aware, I know, but no, if you can be honest with any person, be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself to say, yes, I know that I am, I have this bias, or no, that I don't. Nobody's going to check you because you know why? It's you. You check yourself. Make sure that you think about it and you are intentional and self-reflecting. The other way that you could do it is to understand the nature of biases. It's really essential. The strategy of categorizing others, that's what gives rise to unconscious bias. And it's a normal aspect of being a human being, but it's important that if we want to change our approach to do it, we have to be intentional in our efforts. Anybody who goes to school or does personal professional development, you're being intentional into constantly bettering yourself. That is the same way with our biases. We always have to be intentional of it. I can tell you one of the things I've learned about myself is that when I meet new people, because I'm being so mindful of how people like to be addressed, I will ask, hello, how are you doing? What is your preferred pronoun? That's something that's a conversation that's happening more and more because why? People appreciate that you address them in their preferred pronoun rather than assuming, because assumptions can do what? Make a you-know-what of ourselves. And so that's the last thing that we want to do. And so I wanted to be very conscious of time, and I hope that you all enjoyed this presentation. As I mentioned, there are a number of, we have a webinar series that is free on diversity, equity, and inclusion that is presented by G.R.A.N.T. And I will be in the next session as a panelist where we'll be talking about workplace professionalism and norms, cultural norms. That is free, is coming up. You can all register for free for that session. I want to share my information. And if you would like to, if you have any questions or concerns or any way that you would like to for me to help, I love to help. I'm here for you. You can email me, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Rashonda Harris. And I will also be sharing on my LinkedIn the link so that you can register for the upcoming session that I mentioned as well. And it's been my pleasure to be here with everyone today. I really hope you've enjoyed this session as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Great content in the chat as well.
Thank you so much, Rashonda. Very thought-provoking presentation. I'll just tell you, I even have to check myself sometimes. I think I'm pretty much very aware of myself, but I think I like to ask where everybody's from. That's one of the things when you meet people in different parts of the country. So I'll need to maybe think twice about how that might impact who I'm asking from now on. So thank you for that. There are a couple of questions in there. I don't know if you have time. I know there was one about how do you deal head on with microaggressions when you hear them?
Okay, so that's actually a great one. Honestly, the best way to deal with a microaggression is to pull the person aside. The worst thing you could do is to address it in front of everybody and then ostracize that person. Pull that person aside and say, hey, I'm not sure if you're aware, but what you said is a form of a microaggression, and it may be offensive to fill in the blank employee. So, that right there is bringing attention, it's bringing awareness, it's telling them, hey, oh man, I didn't even realize that what I said was offensive. Thank you for letting me know that. But you've done it in a way where you pull them to the side, likely, preferably in a place that is just you two, where you can, have that conversation so that if there are questions that they have, they can ask them as well.
Thank you for that. You have some great comments in there. I think everyone is in agreement. We enjoyed this presentation. If you guys have any additional questions, we're running short on time. And I know, Rashonda, you have a whole nother session that you have to get to. So definitely reach out to Rashonda with any questions. Thank you all for attending all of the sessions today. It's been a long day, but it's been a really, really good day full of all kinds of great presentations. Again, we'll reach out to all of you who have registered with the handouts, with the slides, in PDF format, and with some evaluations for each session that we'll then share with our presenters. So thank you so much for joining us. And, hopefully we'll be back in person for the Georgia Research Administrators Network conference next year. If not, we've seen that virtual's a success. It went pretty well, I think. So thank you all again, and I hope to see some of you all soon. Just like Rashonda said, I'm on LinkedIn as well. Feel free to connect. I'm trying to become more active on there. I'm not as active as Rashonda is, but I'll get there.
No worries. Erica, thank you so much. Great job with hosting today. I really appreciate everything.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all the presenters. We couldn't have done it without you. And thanks to Gail at Georgia Tech for kind of manning the grant ship. All right, you guys have a great afternoon. I know some of you, your days aren't over. There's work to be done. So we'll talk soon. Again, we can be reached grants@columbusstate.edu if you have any follow-up questions. All right, thanks guys. Have a good day. Bye-bye.